So when it comes to talking about Scotland and indeed like a post potential independent Scotland, I've always said there are a lot of questions that the SNP actually have to answer, which they either A, haven't answered or are very, very good at dodging the questions. So I found a very interesting article today on the Yorkshire bylines written by someone who was basically born and raised in Scotland and has again a lot of valid questions that again are the exact same questions that I answer about an independent Scotland. Like, once you go independent, how are you going to solve this problem? Or what about this? So it is very clear that there is, I think, a change needed in Scottish politics. But where does it go? And very often, sometimes, independence is not often, the golden solution. I think a lot of the SNP seem to think that it will be. But there you go. So anyway, before we do jump into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, as well as one donation link called Buy Me a Coffee. And of course, the YouTube memberships are now open as well. So this comes from, like I say, the Yorkshire bylines, and the title is Scotland Needs a Change, just not the one you're thinking of. So, as a student who spent their childhood growing up in Scotland, I cannot recall a time when the Scottish National Party, or the SNP, was not in power in my country. More than that, my memories of having a First Minister who wasn't Nicola Sturgeon are very few and far between. In a recent conversation with a friend, we mulled over the fact and pondered if we might ever like to live, or even ever live to see a day, when anyone actually managed to displace her from the highest office in the land. Don't we have term limits for this type of thing? My friend asked. I don't think we do, I mused, and surprised by my own response as I said it. The Scottish system of government was, at its inception, presumably designed not to need them. However, our founding fathers did not have the foresight to predict the storming success of the SNP would have in the 20 years to come. And it has highlighted the centralised state of affairs that this would leave us with. Despite having an electoral system explicitly designed to prevent one-party rule, the SNP is entering its 14th year in power, and its 7th with Nicola Sturgeon at the helm. In another country, the fact that decision-making powers are concentrated in the hands of a very small circle, and that includes the First Minister's husband as party chair, were essentially no threat to their continued reign. It would raise eyebrows. However, for some reason, the same rules do not seem to apply to this country. Of course, a large part of the SNP's success lies in its relentless commitment to the independence debate, a question which is becoming increasingly split down the fault line of age. Support among Scotland's young people for independence has risen significantly since the 2014 referendum, with a New Statesman poll finding of September last year that 71% of 16 to 34-year-olds would be in support of the Yes campaign. This represents a very seismic change from the picture 7 years ago when it was 54%. So, the SNP's gains in this age category are also not surprising. The party and its independence crusade has on paper all the things my generation looks for in a political campaign. Promises of radical change and a rebuttal of the status quo, also known as Tory politics. And they are alone already winning a combination. Combine this with the SNP's left-leaning and progressive policy agenda and opposition to Brexit, and there are very few boxes the youth agenda that the party isn't ticking. Yet, despite sympathising with some of these causes, I still find myself in the silent majority, even amongst my own age group, on whether the question of Scottish independence and SNP support. Whilst my apathy towards Westminster politics and anti-Leave tendencies are aligned with the views of most of my peers, I have yet to be convinced that an independent Scotland is a silver bullet solution to fixing these, or any of the country's problems that we actually face. In 2015, Nicola Sturgeon urged voters to judge her own government's education record and the campaign promised to tackle Scotland's attainment gap between those of the most deprived areas and some of the more affluent peers. However, that fact, and 6 years on, little if any progress has actually been made. To narrow this gap was largely left out of this discussion in the run-up to our most recent election. So too were the other problems of our healthcare system, roads, criminal justice system, and a recent poll by Ipsos Mori found that education to be the most second important issue for Scottish voters, ahead of both the NHS and the pandemic, but still behind the independence question, which took the top spot. In this polarisation that meant the efforts of opposition parties to shift focus on the SNP's record on public service during the election campaign fell largely on deaf ears. In the current discourse of Scottish politics, these issues are not only deemed to be secondary concerns to the independence question, but by many as the actual wholly attribute to the political ties that we still have with the rest of the UK. Over the last year, the SNP has been very clever in capitalising on widespread weariness of the Tory politics and a desire for change to try and galvanise their support. They consistently have higher approval ratings than their First Minister received compared with their counterpart in Downing Street throughout the pandemic, despite making many of the same mistakes, in a stark proof of just what an easy scapegoat the Westminster government currently is. In tackling this approach, the SNP has managed to successfully divert attention away from other policy failings, as well as skirting around the details for how an independent Scotland would actually be financed. I enjoy going back home to pick up my free prescriptions and bragging about the lower interest on my student loans to my university peers in England, as much as the next student would. However, there is no evidence to support the idea that an independent Scotland and its policies like those would actually be sustainable. Certainly not when free university tuition and free care for the elderly, and most recently, promises of free bikes and bus travel for young people are also added to the bill. While very laudable pursuits, it is these and other handouts that have left Scotland paying 30% more for public services, £1.30 per person for every pound spent in England, under the generosity and the controversial Barnett formula, according to the figures released by the Institute for Fiscal Studies earlier this year. So policies and polarisation are pretty much synonymous terms these days, and I was really wishing for the former without the latter to be the narrative and a fruitless search. However, it is difficult not to become very disillusioned with a government who has campaigned for at least the last 10 years been built on the exploitation of polarisation at the expense of the practical political discussions. I yearn for change as just the rest of my peers do. However, the change I want to see does not involve cutting ties with our closest friends and allies in the hope that everything will be magically made better. Rather, it is a shift in priorities towards the issues that really matter on the ground, and a system of governments that fosters competition and is not in a diversive but a productive one instead. So that, to be honest, you don't hear a lot of Scottish people tending to talk of, but that is exactly the same questions I would have if I was Scottish about a Scottish, independence. Like I say, I often hear, SNP, and I've been in a lot of very pro SNP forums, and I've ghosted around them, even on Reddit. Independence is treated as this magic or cure bullet, but take it from someone from a Scottish person themselves, they do not see a potential financial future in being able to keep all those promises going. And I'd raise the same spectre as well. And I know a lot of people are going to be very angry at me for bringing this up, because I know I do have a lot of Scottish viewers, a lot of very pro-independence viewers. But I've said this before, if I was Scottish, I would not be voting for independence. And I know that's going to annoy a lot of people, but, I'd rather people honestly hear the truth, then you could actually start a proper conversation about this. And if anyone out there is very pro-SNP and wants to have me on their channel and discuss these, I'd be more than up for talking about that, because maybe there are solutions to this that I haven't heard. Maybe there are. convince me that I'm wrong. But like I say, I've said before, if Scotland does go independent, then, it's someplace else for me to escape to, because I've got potentially Ireland and I've got Scotland as well. So, like I say, I'm not against the idea of Scottish independence. I just think that it is being treated as a very much like magic silver bullet for all of Scotland's ills, and it really shouldn't be treated that way. Like I say, Brexit is a perfect example of this. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there is a link to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can also buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.